Hey guys, what is up? So today I want to talk about spacing. Spacing is probably the biggest foundation of any melee combat game. It's certainly true for Dark Souls 3. It's true for really any melee combat game. You could be talking about Super Smash Bros., Tekken, or even Minecraft. It's all the same basic concepts. Once you learn spacing and you apply these skills in Dark Souls 3, you'll be amazed at how quickly you can apply these same concepts in any other melee combat game, and it will make you a much better player in those other games immediately once you start to internalize these concepts. So what is spacing? Spacing is nothing more really than knowledge and control of the space around you and the space around your opponent. Spacing means understanding if your opponent swings. Do you have to roll the attack or can you stand your ground? Similarly, it means if you swing your weapon, does your opponent have to roll? Will they get attacked if you swing, or can they stand their ground? And understanding your position relative to your opponent and understanding spacing will enable you to position yourself in such a way that you can improve your chances of victory, and we'll talk more about exactly how you would do that. It's important to emphasize, spacing itself is not really a strategy or a way you win. Instead, spacing is the foundation upon which you build all your other game skills. And we'll see that in a bit more detail as we progress. So some of the things that you use for spacing, whiff punishing. Whiff punishing is probably the single best example. So whiff punishing consists of baiting your opponent into swings that are not going to connect, that you do not have to roll, so you can stand your ground and attack them in their recovery frames. In order to do that, you have to be able to space well. The better you can space, in other words, the closer you can get to your opponent without actually being hit by their attack, the more likely you are to be able to bait them into attack that you can in turn whiff punish. It also means that when they swing, you don't necessarily have to roll. And not having to roll means you have more frames that you can do other things. You can run around, you can swing your weapon. Whenever you roll, you are at a disadvantage of sorts because it becomes very predictable where you're going to be. You roll in a single direction, your opponent knows immediately where you'll be when that roll ends. It also means when you swing, making sure that you don't get outspaced. Outspaced essentially means that your opponent doesn't have to roll and they can then feel free to whiff punish you. So when you're playing against players that can space really well, you need to be extra cautious to ensure that when you do swing, your opponent is in range of your attack, meaning you're either going to trade attacks with them, they're going to roll, or they're going to get hit and take damage. So how do you learn spacing? Well, there's no quick and easy way, unfortunately, and this is where experience comes in. But if you're trying to improve your spacing, one of the things that you can do is you can start standing closer to your opponents. Try to stand closer to somebody when they swing a straight sword without rolling. If you think you're out of range of the straight sword, go ahead and stand your ground. You may be wrong, maybe you'll take damage and then you'll know, hey, I was standing too close. Next time I need to stand a bit further away. And over time, you will learn how different weapons work, how much of a range these weapons have, and we'll also talk about how latency can affect that, but we'll get to that topic in a little bit. But you'll learn for each weapon how far you can stand, how close you can get without being attacked. If you watch some of the really great players play, you'll notice that this is something that they're able to do exceptionally well. They're able to bait people into whiffing, they're able to punish those whiffs with their own whiff punishes, and you'll also notice that these players don't do a lot of superfluous rolling. They only roll when they absolutely have to. So since Dark Souls 3 is a network game, we can't talk about spacing without talking about latency and how latency works in Dark Souls 3. You'll sometimes hear people speak of a weapon's phantom range, and all that they mean by phantom range is range of the weapon that extends beyond the apparent range that you would expect based on the model of the weapon. And phantom range can really come from two different sources. Source one is the actual hitbox of the weapon is longer than the model of the weapon. And this happens sometimes, and it's not all that unusual, and you'll get accustomed to that pretty quickly because that's always the same on a given weapon. If a particular straight sword has phantom range of this type, well, it will always have that exact same phantom range, and you'll get used to that really quickly. And in fact, you really don't even have to think about that type of phantom range because you'll just grow used to it so quickly. The other type of phantom range is a bit more difficult to manage. That type of phantom range comes from the fact that we're playing a network game and there's always going to be some amount of latency involved. And it's really important that you understand how the hit detection in Dark Souls 3 works. So for hit detection, we have to remember that we're playing a network game. That means there's always going to be some amount of latency involved. So let's consider two players, players A and player B. Player A goes to attack player B. In order to determine whether player B takes damage or not, a few things happen. The first thing that happens is, on player A's computer, the distance between player A and player B is checked. And if that distance is in range of the weapon, a message is then sent to player B's computer. On player B's computer, a check is made to see if player B is in iframes or not. So take note, the distance between both players is not checked on player B's computer, only player A's. So if you're moving away from each other, the distance that you appear to be from each other on player A's screen could well be less than the distance between you on player B's screen. And since the distance check happens on player A's screen, that means that as the latency increases, the range of the weapon, or the apparent range of the weapon, can increase. And you'll notice this as you start to improve its spacing. You may start to get pretty comfortable with spacing, and then you'll encounter a player that's further away from you, or maybe just has a worse network condition, and you'll notice that the apparent range of his attacks is much larger. Now, it's not actually true that it's necessarily larger. It depends on what's going on both your screens. If you're moving away from each other, then the distance will appear to be magnified. But if you're closing the distance on the other player, it can have the opposite effect. It will seem to shorten the range of your opponent's weapon. And so one of the things you have to be thinking about as you're planning your rolls and your spacing is what's going on and what has just been happening up until now. Were you moving closer together, moving further away? You can generally be much more aggressive in your spacing as you're moving toward a player as you can when you're moving away from a player. So the range of weapons is dependent both on the weapon itself and the amount of latency that you're experiencing. The higher the latency, the greater the variance in the seeming range of the weapon, which again can be higher or lower depending on how you're moving. One thing to keep in mind is that latency affects better players more than it affects worse players, and that's because better players tend to be able to space better and have tighter spacing and be able to really get just as close as they can without being hit. And so high latency fights tend to bug more experienced players more because it upsets their better spacing and frankly takes away one of the strongest tools in their arsenals. Hey everybody, I think that's about all I have to say about spacing today. There's certainly a lot more I could say and probably will in future videos, but I think for a beginner video this is about enough. I want to issue a special thanks to my friend Kheim for spending so much time with me and helping me create all these clips and recording all the footage from his end, so I was able to mix and match footage from both our perspectives. Just to give you guys a little bit of a heads up, the upcoming videos I'm going to talk about hyper armor. That's probably the next video in the series. I'm also going to do a detailed build making video. I know in the intro I touched on the topic briefly, but I'm going to get into some more of the details around build making, and who knows where we'll take it from there. So I hope you stay tuned. I hope you guys get value out of this. Thanks for stopping by.